Hello friends, I'm Swapna Shetty. In this video, we will be able to identify the limitation of a web server and distinguish between different types of web programming and understand the life cycle of a servlet and develop a web application. So any application or project can be divided into two parts like Windows-based or desktop applications, web-based or online applications. So in Windows-based or desktop applications or projects, customers do not have the flexibility to access the business services as they like. They need to contact the business organization physically. End users for such applications would be the staff of that particular organization. Whereas in web-based applications, they are also known as online applications, gives the flexibility to the customers so that they can access the business services of a particular organization whenever and wherever required. So what is basically a web application? Any computer application is said to be a web application if we can use its services through web, that is through internet service. Web applications are meant for providing online business services to the customers 24/7 by 365. Web applications are also known as online applications and not standalone applications. So this is the architecture of a web application. So web client, that is a web browser normally developed using HTML or JavaScript, and web server developed using servlets or JSPs or Java Beans, etc., and the database server. So all these three processes can run on same machine or in three different machines. So web client is a browser process. Web server process includes servlets, JSP, Java Beans, etc. So all these processes use JDBC to communicate with the database. So within the browser, web pages should run, and these web pages are developed using HTML and JavaScript. The HTML pages, that is the web pages, are stored in the server machine and are loaded into the client process, that is browser in client machine on the fly. The browser executes these pages. Browser can execute HTML code, JavaScript code, and also applet code. So web client is nothing but it is a software that requests a web server for web resources. In fact, it is also known as HTTP client because it uses HTTP as the communication protocol to communicate with the web server. Similarly, for a web server, it is a server software, that is a process but not hardware. It is also known as HTTP server. So we have got a limitation of the web server. If we use web server alone to support a website, it becomes only informative website but cannot be an interactive website. So what is informative website is we can perform only read operation on the website. User cannot enter any input into the website. All he can do is just reading the pages. Interactive website is we can perform both read and write operations on the website. So any commercial business process always requires interactive websites. Next is we have got different types of web programming like client-side programming and the Java server-side programming. So client-side programming is nothing but JavaScript programming which validates the HTML code. That is, it forces the end user to enter correct, complete, and proper input into the web form. So what is the necessary of server-side programming is to overcome the limitation of web server and assist in making the websites interactive. So general duties of a server-side programming would be like capturing the user input, communicating with the database and processing the data, and creating response page that comprises of the processed data and hand over that web page to the web server. So these are the duties of the server-side programming. So coming to the introduction to the servlets. So before servlets, CGI Perl was used for server-side programming. So in Perl, each client is treated as a single process. As number of clients increases, number of processes increase and hence performance decreases. To overcome this drawback, servlets like technologies are used. In servlets, no matter how many processors are connecting, that is clients are connecting, all of them would be treated as one single process with multiple threads. So the performance is better. So servlets is one of the web technologies from Sun Microsystems. It is also a specification. It's nothing but a set of rules. And it is one of the enterprise edition. And the purpose of a servlet is to overcome the limitation of the web server and make the web application interactive. So what is a servlet? Basically, it is a server-side piece of code that enhances the functionality of a web server. And it's a dynamic web resource. That is, it is the presence of the dynamic web resource that makes the web application interactive. And a servlet is a web component. So basically J2EE components are like servlets and JSPs, that is web components, and EJB, which is a business component. So servlet is not a web application, it is just a part of web application. So hence it is known as a web component. It cannot be executed as if a program is executed. It doesn't have any main method. So servlet cannot be called as a program, but it is only a component. For example, consider a tubelight as an example. It has different components like tube, choke, starter, frame, etc. Individually, these components are of no use. When assembled together, only it becomes an application. That's a web component. And a servlet is a specialized Java class, and it produces dynamic web pages. Dynamic web pages, like we have static web pages and dynamic web pages. Static web pages are stored in the file system of the server, whereas dynamic web pages are not stored. They are created, or they are created by through programmatically. When we write programs using servlets, we get dynamic web pages. That is, the result of dynamic web pages is different for different users, whereas static web pages is all same for all the users. And moreover, servlet contains Java code plus HTML code. Within the Java methods, we pass the HTML content inside the Java methods. So that is the reason we say servlet contains both Java code and the HTML code. Prerequisites, like what are the system requirements to develop and run Java-based interactive web applications? That is, first we need Java, that is JDK. Here we are using JDK 1.6, and any web container, preferably the Tomcat. So what is a web container? Basically, it's a server software written in Java according to JSP and Servlets specification. It has got three modules like HTTP server or web server, Servlet engine or containers, JSP engine or JSP container. So only when the projects are developed using Java, a web container is used. With other technologies like .NET, Perl, etc., server software are web server only. In Java, web container is like a superset of web server. So these web server softwares do not have servlets and JSP engines. Hence, only web servers like two softwares cannot support servlet and JSP based websites. And next, servlet development. Basically, servlet is a container managed public Java class that implements directly or indirectly Java x.servlet.servlet interface. So within servlet interface, we have a child class called generic servlet, and then we write our servlet class. So generic servlet implements this servlet interface. So hence we can consider that generic servlet as a servlet because of inheritance. Our servlet class extends generic servlet class. Hence our servlet class is servlet because of inheritance again. So basically a servlet is a container managed public Java class. Next we have servlet lifecycle. Here the servlet engine controls the lifecycle of our servlet. So that is the reason I said a servlet is a container managed. So container managed implies the servlet class is managed and its objects are created and destroyed by the container but not by the programmer. So servlet lifecycle is described by 3 lifecycle methods called init, service and destroy, and 4 lifecycle phases. So init, service and destroy methods are the lifecycle methods. So servlet engine calls them at appropriate time. So first, Servlet engine calls the init method soon after it has created the servlet instance. So in the life of servlet instance, init method is called only once by the servlet engine, that too implicitly. Just before the servlet instance is destroyed, that is garbage collected, servlet engine calls this destroy method. So this method is also called implicitly by the servlet engine only once. Each time the client request comes, servlet engine calls the service method. That is, the service method is called n times implicitly by the servlet engine on the servlet instance. So therefore we can say that a servlet spends most of its life in serving the client's request, and hence the name servlet. Coming to the phases of a servlet, we have different phases like instantiation, initialization, servicing phase, and the destruction phase. So in the instantiation, all these phases are again controlled by the servlet engine. So in the instantiation phase, like servlet engine loads our servlet class, then it creates the servlet instance. In the initialization phase, servlet engine creates servlet config object and calls the init method. Similarly, in the servicing phase, servlet engine calls request and response objects, and then it calls the service method. So based on the number of requests, the service method will be called. So in the instantiation phase, when the servlet engine receives the first client request for our servlet, it loads the servlet class into memory. Servlet's engine creates the servlet instance of the loaded class. So in this phase, the servlet instance is missing with the 2 pieces of information called initialization information and the context information. So that is when the object is born or it is created, it doesn't have any serving capability. So what is context information is, it is some environmental information, that is exactly on which field to work on and all. So it doesn't possess any servletness, that is serving nature, and hence it cannot serve any client request. But in the initialization phase, servlet engine creates the servlet config object encapsulating the above missing information, that is initialization information and the context information. Basically, servlet config is an interface. Its object implies that it's an object of a child class that implements this interface. And next is how to develop a simple web application. So first thing we need to do is we have to create a structured hierarchy of directories. That is, we need to create a directory with any name. It becomes the application root context. That is, the container recognizes the resources of the application with this name only. So this name would become the name of the total application. Next, we need to develop a web resource, like web resource in the sense the HTML documents or any image files or servlets, JSPs, all such resources have to be developed. Next is we need to develop a deployment descriptor. It is nothing but a file whose name and extension would be web.xml. Only one such file needs to be developed, and it is mandatory. It's a normal text file. Name should be web and extension should be .xml. They cannot be changed. If it is changed, container doesn't understand the file, and we need not know any XML to develop this file. And finally, we have to configure the application files. Configuring the application files is all the HTML files, JSP files, image files are to be kept under the root directory, and the Java class files are to be copied into the classes directly, and jar files are to be copied into lib directory, and web.xml to be copied into webinf folder. So let's see how do we develop a simple web application which is used to just print a message like welcome to servlets. So for that, First thing I need to do is I have to open the Java W perspective. So once you open the Java WEE perspective, that is Enterprise Edition. Okay, this is Java W perspective, wherein first I have to create a new dynamic web project. So here I have to give the project name, like I give welcome as the project name, welcome servlet. And dynamic web module version, that is the servlet version, I'm using 2.5 because 3 version it is supported by Tomcat 7. Since we are using Tomcat 6, I need to use the version 2.5 for this servlet. So select the version and give the name and then say next. And here you can see generate web.xml deployment descriptor. This has to be generated automatically. So I've just checked the box here, then say finish. So on the left hand side on the project explorer, you can see the welcome project, dynamic web project. So open this project. So under here you can see Java resources, under which we have source files where we need to write our servlets and all. Then we have library files and so on. And in the web content we have webinf, under which we have got lib folder and the web.xml folder. So when you open this web.xml file and click on source, you can see this is the XML version. Like it is showing, just showing us the welcome file list. So now a root application which we have developed. Next is we need to develop the web resource. That is, I write a simple servlet for this, like new servlet, and package is com.educators and class name is welcome servlet. So click on next. So you can see the URL mapping here, which we will use while running the application. This is the URL mapping, that is /welcome servlet. Just click on next. And here I want only the service method. I do not want any do get or do post. So I'm just using this service method. So just click on service method and just say finish. So initially you can see the errors like Java x.servlet cannot be resolved. So we need to add the jar file for using servlets. For that, so just right click on the project, say build path, configure build path, add external jars. So I need to go to the folder where my Tomcat has been installed. So my Tomcat has been installed in C drive, program files, Apache Software Foundation, Tomcat 6. So under this lib folder we have servlet api.jar. So you have to add this .jar file to the libraries. So click OK. So once you add the servlet api.jar file, all the compile time errors are being removed. Next is we have a public class welcome servlet, which is extending HTTP servlet. We have basically have two types of servlets called generic servlet and the HTTP servlet. So right now I'm just using generic servlet. The difference between these two servlets is Generic servlet, it supports all types of protocols, whereas HTTP servlet supports only HTTP protocol. So right now I'm just using generic servlet, and when my servlet is extending generic servlet, I need to import it, which is in Java x.servlet package. So import that class, and then I need to add unimplemented methods like this service method in the we have service method in the generic servlet, so that method I need to add it here. So you can see the service method has got two arguments called servlet request and servlet response. So I'm just changing the variable names, that is request, and here it is response, RES. So request is an object which accepts the input data entered by the user in a form, and response will have the whereabouts of the client, like all the results, response pages and all. So first, since I need to display message onto the servlet, so first I have to write my servlet. So first I need to set the content type, that is response dot set content type. So this is returning the servlet response. So content type is we need to we are using this method in order to mention the MIME type, that is basically we have like text or HTML or image file or whatever it is what we are displaying on the web page. So that content type we need to mention first, and then in order to write it on a servlet on the web page, I need an object, output object for that. So for that I just say response dot get writer would give me a print writer object. So capture it in an object, or simply I say out. So print writer is a class which is located in java.io package. So using this object, now I'll call the methods like println and write the HTML code inside the methods like out.println. Inside this I write HTML code, that is HTML out.println body, and in the next line I would just print the message using h1 tag. So h1 welcome to servlets, and close the tag, and correspondingly close all the tags like body and the HTML also. So I said servlet contains both Java code and the HTML code. Now after closing the HTML, close the out object as well as. Now let's see what is there in web.xml page. You can see a servlet tag and also a servlet mapping tag. So this is basically a servlet registration section, and this is a servlet mapping section. So here we can see the servlet name, that is welcome servlet. This could be any name, and this is the class name, that is the servlet class name, com.educators.welcome servlet. And here you can see the URL pattern. So this can be any name. This is the public URL name of the servlet. So basically a servlet has got three names. One is the registration name, and next is the class name, and next is the public URL name. So the purpose of, what is the purpose of this servlet tag? It is to register a servlet with the web application. And the purpose of servlet mapping section is to give public URL name to the servlet and indicate to the servlet engine to map a client request to a particular servlet. Now, when we want to run this servlet, let's see how do we run this. So first is, when I say right click and run on server, we didn't attach any server here. So first is we need to attach the server. So in Apache I have Tomcat 6. So just say the server's host name is just localhost because I'm using in the same system, and this is the server name, and click on next. And I have already Tomcat, so I'll just browse to that path, that is my computer, C drive, and the C drive program files, Apache Tomcat 6. So browse, this is the Tomcat installation directory, then click on next, and you can see here the resources that we have configured. Welcome Servlet project. So click on next. So in the servers tab, you can see the Tomcat has been added. Now, so it is asking the several ports required to be or already in use, so we need to change the port numbers for this. So for that you can change by saying open. So you can see the Tomcat port numbers here. So I just change the port numbers like 8080. Just change the numbers. And say Control S to save and close this and just run it again. Run on server. Just click on next and say finish. So you can see servlet has been executed and it has just printed welcome to servlets. So when we have started the server, we have got the output. So to use the services of the web application, we need to specify this URL in the browser. So what is this is http:/localhost:/ the port number and the project name and the servlet name. So URL is a pointer to a web resource that is basically divided into three parts, that is how part and where and what. So how is how to recognize the resource, that is it is using HTTP protocol, and in which machine the Tomcat server is running, that is the IP address of the machine. So we have used localhost because we have used same machine for browser and server also. So in this part, this port number of server, that is port number of Tomcat, that is changed to some number has to be mentioned, that is 8081. And what part is, it includes the public URL name, that is /welcome servlet along with the application name. So the first is the application name and next is the public URL name. So based on this URL, the web resource will be accessed. So this is how we developed a simple web application. That's all with the session.